Welcome to this live edition of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast on 12 Ounce Sports. From Lima to the Ohio River in northern Kentucky, and from eastern Indiana to Madison County and all points in between, this is the podcast talking local Southwest Ohio sports. Check out the leewmowen.com/podcast for more information and platforms on how to listen to the podcast. Follow the host on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at the Lee W. Mowen and the podcast at Cinday Pod. Here's your host, Lee W. Mowen. Three years of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast. I can hardly believe it, ladies and gentlemen. But more importantly, this is the first live stream. Yours truly has been on 12 Ounce Sports. The fine folks behind 12 Ounce Sports, they have done everything and have given me a platform to, boost everything up. And I am excited. So I want to thank the nice, kind folks at 12 Ounce Sports for giving me a shot. And hopefully soon, I'll be able to write about sports happening. Today, this podcast turns 4 years old. I have done this podcast for 3 years, and I can hardly believe it. And this coronavirus quarantine, I'll be quite honest with you, I had no idea what was going to happen to me and the podcast. Luckily, I figured out what to do with the podcast with a bunch of interviews, 26 of them. In fact, and I am planning to do a bunch more on the podcast. Again, welcome to 12 Ounce Sports live stream. This is Lee W. Mowen here on the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast. For those of you that can't make it or you want to catch it again, it will be episode 172, and I'll probably have that uploaded tomorrow. We will cover the sponsors of 12 Ounce Sports as this program goes along, but got to thank the fine folks at my bookie. And also don't forget to check out the local shops. By local shops, I mean online. You can pick up a lot of Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast gear from TeePublic and Redbubble. So let's get things underway. I got a couple of questions thanks to the other fine folks that are part of the 12 Ounce Sports family. And we will be covering those as this hour goes along. In fact, I don't see any reason why to hold these questions, so it's time for Mowen's Mailbag. It sure is time for Mowen's Mailbag. If you can send me questions and I catch them, I will answer them live on this stream. If not, that's what 173 will be for. So the first question I got in Mowen's Mailbag is from the Sports Stance. In a shortened season, do you think the Reds have a legitimate shot to make the playoffs? Yes, I do. There's actually two questions from the Sports Stance. Thank you very much, folks. But yes, I do. And I'll tell you why. That lineup that the Reds can offer in, day out, I think is fantastic. I think if the Reds don't start off with a big old cold streak like they did last year, where they went, 1-8? Yeah, I think this Reds team can compete, and I think their offense is going to be fine in the NL Central. Well, sorry, the Central, because there's AL teams also in there as well. Pitching-wise, starting pitchers, I feel great about. I think they are going to be fine on the starting five. Bullpen, however, well, last year it didn't start off to be a crutch of the team, but as the season wore on, the bullpen got gassed. I do worry about that, and I worry about, some of the arms, first coming in. I mean, Pedro Strop did pick up his first exhibition win yesterday. We'll talk a little bit about that. But I think it'll be okay. I think, yes, the Reds can get to the playoffs in a shortened 60-game season. Can you believe that the season opens up later on in the week? The Reds' first game will be against the Detroit Tigers on Friday. It's just so weird to say. I mean, did you really think that we'd have baseball or any sports until, the turn of the new year? I was getting to that point where, yeah, I was thinking, no, we're not going to have sports until then. I still hope I'm wrong, and it looks like I will be wrong with, MLS being a thing in Florida. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And the Reds opening up season had an exhibition game yesterday against a team that wasn't another Cincinnati Reds team. So, I don't know. Maybe I'm a extreme pessimist on that. But the second question from the Sports Stance: will Joe Burrow throw for 20-plus touchdowns this season? And will the Bengals not finish in last place in the AFC North? Yes and yes. And here's my reasons why. Joe Burrow, I think, is going to be a tremendous quarterback. Of course, a short time in college ball and having his best season last year, how much can you really read into that coming into his rookie year in the National Football League? And I've always been the type of mind to think, it's not, especially football, especially if they're going to 80 players on a team. I mean, Joe Burrow is one Bengal out of that whole squad. He's got to have a great year. The offensive line has to do better. I mean, granted, as the year went on last year, considering the Bengals finished 2-14, I think the O-line did get better earlier on that season. Let's not talk about that. And also that 2-14 record, yeah, it's 2 wins out of 16 played, but look at most of the losses. They were competitive. There's only a few blowout losses, like to San Francisco, New Orleans, 2 great teams in the NFL. So I definitely think the Bengals will not finish last, and I think Joe Burrow will have himself a great year, pending any injuries happening. I mean, A.J. Green, if he comes back this year, I think he's going to do well. T. Higgins, learning from A.J. Green, who learned from Ocho Cinco. I definitely think, I think the Bengals are in for a good year. Super Bowl year, let's not go there. Playoff year, I'm pretty optimistic on that. But again, we got to see how Joe Burrow does. I want to see how that offensive line does. I want to see how the free agents do. I think the Bengals have definitely improved thanks to the free agent market, which is something that the Bengals don't really do in their history. Well, especially since the Mike Brown days began in the early 1990s. I have high hopes for this Bengals team. Granted, my high hopes don't mean, hey, the Bengals are going to do well. I'm just a broadcaster, announcer, and podcaster giving you my opinion on that. But I definitely think Joe Burrow will throw for 20-plus touchdowns, especially if Green's healthy, Higgins, and I really want to see how Drew Sample does as a tight end, especially since Tyler Eifert is no longer a Bengal. Where is he? Jacksonville? I think it's Jacksonville. But, yes, thank you, Sports Stance, for those questions. And another question.
It's time for Mowen's Mailbag.
No, I don't have to keep playing that sound from my Rodecaster Pro, but you know what? I like it. This is from Cody Jansen. Again, all these are from the 12 Out Sports family. Thank you, folks, for chipping in some questions. This one's a little bit out of the Sunday reach, but I'll take it because you know me. I do like sports, and this is about hockey. Could Cleveland, Ohio support an NHL team? I don't know if I still have an answer. I've been racking my brain on that, getting everything set up. It's like, can Cleveland really support an NHL team? Considering that Columbus, Ohio, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania have teams, that's a lot of NHL hockey, and I don't know if that will work. Could Cleveland, Ohio, and their fans support a team? Absolutely. I think that would be nice for Cleveland. I mean, historically, they had the Cleveland Barons, and that fun story merging with the, what was it? Was it the California Golden Seals at the time, or was it the Oakland Seals? It was with the Seals, and they're out west, and then they finally merged into the Minnesota North Stars. Also Detroit, Michigan, too. I mean, that's 3 markets, and Cleveland's, that's not a bad trip no matter where you go. I like the current setup for NHL, AHL with Columbus and Cleveland. I think that's a beautiful partnership. And I hope that lasts for quite some time. Now, my ultimate dream would be Cincinnati completing the I-71 chain for the Blue Jackets. Or, Dayton, Ohio getting a ECHL team again, but we need an arena for that, and I talk about this a lot on the podcast, but that's okay. I think the fans of Cleveland could support it. Will NHL have a team that close to 3 other teams in Toronto, Ontario, Canada? I don't know. I don't think so, but then again, who am I to say? But yeah, I definitely like to see Cleveland keep supporting hockey, and, I wanted to say the Q, but it's Rocket Mortgage Arena now, isn't it? Won't play that theme again. I'll save your ears for once. From Minor League Rando. This is someone that I like following his stuff on 12 Ounce Sports, especially since he also talks about the Federal Hockey League. If you don't know, I was broadcasting with the Dayton teams when the FHL had camp here at Hara Arena. We don't have Hara, we don't have hockey, and our pets' heads are falling off. So there you go. The Bengals seem to be going all in on Joe Burrow, someone who was mediocre until last season. I mean, if you look at his stats, good, and then last year was just, fireworks. So, yeah. Is the team setting themselves up for a failure again if this does not play out? Does not work out, sorry. Oh. Like I mentioned, I believe that the Bengals are going to be relying on Joe Burrow as quarterback, but remember, quarterback is one position, one player. You got to have that offensive line working, the wide receivers, the running back, and I didn't even mention that the first Bengals question. If Joe Mixon has a solid line, look out, because he's going to run all across the NFL. I was about to say NHL. That'd be interesting. Have a running back on ice. No one can stop Joe Mixon, not even the ice. But that's a solid point. Look at the previous cornerstones that the Bengals have tried to draft in my lifetime. The first round picks haven't really worked out. Jonah Williams, I was really high on him, and then bam! He had a season-ending injury before preseason even began. Alkali Smith, like I mentioned. Carson Palmer, you can mention, is probably the best pick that the Bengals had in quarterback-wise. Could you be disappointed on how Carson did in his tenure with Cincinnati? No, I can't really answer that. I like the work that Palmer did, and he had displeasures with the ownership of Cincinnati. That's fine. I don't know, but that's a very good question. Joe Burrow was heavily, announced as going to be the first pick out of the NFL draft, this, previous draft. It's going to be interesting because if Joe Burrow goes down, there's no Andy Dalton. He's now in Dallas. And word on the street is, yes, he dyed his hair blue because, Cowboys colors are blue. Actually, no, he didn't, but he's back in his collegiate state of Texas, with TCU and everything. Who's going to help a Joe Burrow? I forget who the Bengals signed. I know they have a backup, but I don't know. I think if Burrow, Burrow's going to need time to grow. Don't expect that last LSU season into the first year of the Bengals. If it happens, then that's outstanding. That's great. And I love to see that happen, but I'm not expecting it. He's a rookie in the NFL. It's a lot different than the collegiate game. So, it's a very interesting point. If Burrow doesn't work out, then what do the Bengals do? Try again for another first-round pick and see how that works? And I got Michael Hearn messaging me on Facebook. Thank you, Michael Hearn. Great friend to me. Great broadcaster in Northwest Ohio. Also does a great podcast around the Hearn. Can't agree Burrow was mediocre. Yeah, you know what? I take back what I said. It was good, but not, like he was last season. He grew into that. His last year at LSU, we can't really argue on that, was his best. But, hey, Michael, hope you're doing well. And, you know what? Keep up the great work. He's a great guy. So, definitely, thank you, Michael. Like I said, I don't have a crystal ball in front of me. I can't tell you that Burrow's going to light Cincinnati on fire or, it's an overhyped package. I can't tell you that. I don't have a crystal ball, nor do I have a copy of Gray Sports Almanac that's covering 2000 to 2050. I love that movie, Back to the Future 2. I should really watch it again, but never mind. And this is the last question I got. This is from Vegas Squares Podcast. You know what? I'm hitting the button again.
It's time for Mowen's Mailbag.
Vegas Squares Podcast, they do a lot of great work with 12 Ounce Sports too, and they are starting up a golf podcast as well. Do you believe Dayton had a real shot to win the tourney in March? I keep thinking back on it. What a special year that UD had, the Dayton Flyers. 29-2, Obi Toppin, Player of the Year, Anthony Grant, Coach of the Year. I mean, things were spectacular at the University of Dayton Arena. It was fun. We had two great D1 programs in Dayton, Ohio to watch. You had the Flyers and also the Wright State Raiders, although they fell short in the semis of the Horizon League tournament in Indianapolis to UIC, and then Northern Kentucky won the whole king caboodle against the same Flames squad. I keep racking my brain on this. I think the Flyers could have hung with anyone. I mean, their two losses, a dagger against Colorado in OT. Can't remember if Mackenzie Wright hit that three-pointer or not for Colorado. In case you don't know that story, he did sign to be with the Dayton Flyers, but then, Archie Miller takes a job at IU, and here comes Anthony Grant, and he reopens his recruitment, which I think that would have been neat to see Wright with the Dayton Flyers, but hey, And Kansas, too, I mean, that was a fun game to listen to on radio. I remember coming home and listening to it on 1290 AM, and that was tough. I mean, Dayton had a 6-point lead against the Jayhawks. I still think Dayton could have... I think Dayton could have won the whole kit and caboodle, but despite, again, I don't have a crystal ball if it happened, but I think the Flyers might have been able to win it. I think some people put the ceiling at the Final Four. I mean, there are great teams out there. As a Daytonian, I don't want to be like, oh yeah, Dayton would have won the whole thing to everyone else. I think the Flyers would have hung tough. I mean, not counting for any major upsets that might have happened. I think the worst the Flyers would have done was Elite Eight. Really, I think Elite Eight, I think the best would have been, Final Four championship game. So, it's a very good question, and I thank you all for chiming into Mowen's mailbag. And, yeah, I enjoy getting questions. So, thank you to everyone that sent in some, and it did give me a chance to play that sound effect. So, what we're going to do right now, we're going to take our first break, and we are going to talk about name changes. And I hope you stick around. This is the 3-year celebration of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast, episode 172. We'll be back after this quick breather.
Esports are here to stay. Go to jazzsports.ag, log into your account, and look for our new esports section on the top of your screen. Browse through all the different available matches and watch them live with our exclusive esports betting platform. Get instant access to game results, pending and graded bet reports, outright bet types, and upcoming match schedules, all at the easy reach of your fingertips. Jazz Sports puts you in the game.
Drinkade, ready for distribution worldwide.
Listeners, you can buy the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast merchandise thanks to TeePublic. You have a strong choice of variety, from t-shirts, sweatshirts, and hoodies, coffee mugs, phone cases, magnets, stickers, notebooks, totes, and even more. TeePublic also holds frequent sales too, where you can save up to 35% off on just about everything. Visit theleewmountain.com/podcast, then click on the blue Shop My Store at TeePublic button. A portion of each sale helps out the podcast. What are you waiting for? Wear the gear supporting the local Sunday Sports Podcast, thanks to TeePublic. Again, visit theleewmountain.com/podcast, then click on the blue Shop My Store at TeePublic button. TeePublic. Hey folks, this is Lee W. Mowen of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast, and I'm here to talk to you about MyBookie. Since 2014, it's the place where you can bet on anything, anywhere, anytime. Get up to $1,000 on your first deposit bonus. Use the promo code 12OZSports. As well as sports betting, you can play some casino games, take in some live odds in Madden 20 and NBA 2K20, and even bet with Bitcoin. Visit mybookie.ag and use that promo code 12OZSports. That's 12OZSports. MyBookie, the industry's most rewarding loyalty program. I'd just like to go back to the TeePublic ad. Today and tomorrow, you can save up to 35% off everything in the TeePublic store, and short sleeve regular t-shirts are $13. You can get t-shirts with the current podcast logo. I made it myself, and I'm very proud of it. And the best way to get there, go to my press kit, theleewmountain.com/podcast, and click on the TeePublic button. And there you go. You can shop. You can get a lot of stuff on TeePublic. And you can also get a lot of stuff on Redbubble, which I'll tell you about right now. Hey folks, do you like stickers? Sure you do. What about masks, mugs, notebooks, phone cases, throw pillows, backpacks, and even wall clocks? If you like any of those things, check out Redbubble.com. You can search for the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast, then click on either the main or alternative logo, or you can visit my press kit at theleewmountain.com/podcast and click on either podcasting logo from there. You can choose anything you might need from Redbubble's massive selection. Like I mentioned, there are tons of options and a very good showing of new phone cases you might need. Every purchase you make from these stores on Redbubble comes back and helps out yours truly. I myself have purchased a sticker or two from Redbubble, and they are very good quality. The more stickers you buy, the more of a discount you can get. So what are you waiting for? Shop the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast goods from Redbubble. Redbubble. I just like to add on to the Redbubble comment. Yes, my new laptop is covered with a bunch of stickers, and a lot of them, if you don't really know me, won't make any sense, but there you go. So let's continue on with the 3-year celebration. And I mentioned the next topic I'm covering, name changes. Now everyone probably knows about the Washington Redskins changing the name. And in fact, Dominic Gussler and I had a conversation about it on episode 170. If you want to go back and listen to that, it was a very fun conversation. And thank you to not only the Big Ragu, that's Dominic's roller derby name, but Gem City Roller Derby for sharing the episode as well. I do appreciate that. So, how does that trickle down to Cincinnati and Dayton, Ohio? Well, Washington is sometimes an opponent of the Cincinnati Bengals and the Cleveland Browns. There is a big Cleveland Browns fan base in the Dayton area, which makes a lot of sense if you think the Cleveland Browns, the history of the team compared to, the Bengals' second attempt on the gridiron. But how is that affecting sports in Southwest Ohio? Well, I'll tell you. There is a high school in Cincinnati. They call themselves the Anderson Redskins. That's Anderson High School. It's nearby where my uncle lives in the Forest Hills School District. Also sharing a high school with the Turpin Spartans. Lovely area. It's the southeastern part of Cincinnati. It's inside the 275 loop, and it is a beautiful area. Now, my take on name changes is, we're living in a time that, hopefully we're more enlightened, more educated, and learning that, why that name is bad. So, I do like the change. Anderson voted 4-1 to retire that name. There, at least not that I've seen, there hasn't been any news on what Anderson will go by. Dominic Gussler, again, from episode 170, he gave a lot of ideas. The Anderson Alligators, that would be very unique. Actually, that would be unique, but there is a team in Cincinnati that goes by Gators. That's Gamble Montessori. Personally, I hope they go with the Anderson Barons, just because of the fact there was a school, the Amelia Barons, and they merged in. They didn't keep that name, and I do like that name, actually. That's why I hope they pick it. But I don't know. I mean, definitely they're not going by Spartans, because their neighbor and foe in the Eastern Cincinnati Conference, they kind of have that name. Although, to be fair, there's a pair of high schools on State Route 503 for where I'm from that call themselves the Panthers, and one time were both Twin Valley. In fact, there's a fun historical story that if you lived in Lewisburg and wanted to play sports, you'd have to come down to West Alex, which that's not a big trip. That's about 5 miles of curvy road, of course. You'd have to come down to West Alex to play instead of Lewisburg. Nowadays, it's Tri-County North and Twin Valley South, but they share similar colors, they share the Panthers name, and they share being on 503. So, personally, name changes, I think, if they feel like, they're getting more enlightened, I like that idea. But my big debate that I like to have is, where does that stop? As you heard here, Washington and Anderson High School, they're changing their names. And for the former team, NFL Washington, I hope they pick Red Tails, just because that does tie in with American history. The Tuskegee Airmen, that's the name of the planes. Although I've seen Sentinels might be the way Washington's going, which I'd be fine with. I mean, hey, it's unique. There are some schools that do have the name Redskins and have decided not to change it. Fort Loramie up north. There's also Wapakoneta, who got new logos very, very recently, I think a couple years back. Very sharp logos, too, very clean. You also have St. Henry, a big-time player in high school football in the area. And there's also another team, and I'm failing to think what they are. Wapakoneta, Fort Loramie, and St. Henry. When I've talked about this and I, thought about it in my head, Wapakoneta was the one I miss. But I feel like there's a fourth one, and I can't think of it for the life of me. Now, also in Ohio, there are schools that go by the Indians' name. You have nearby Carlisle. You also have Cedarville in Greene County. You have Northwestern Warriors. You have the Wayne Warriors. You got Warriors, you got Indians. I feel like there's a team that goes by a tribe, but I think I'm thinking of William and Mary, which is not in Cincinnati and Dayton. I know my geography. I mean, personally, I think, enlightenment and knowledge is a great thing. And I think if schools feel like they need to do this, I'm on board. And I like to see what the new identities look like. Like I mentioned, I haven't heard any news about Anderson's new look or new name, but you can pretty much count on the fact that that's what I'm really looking forward to. As well as, news about high school football returning, which takes me into my next topic. Will we see sports again this fall? Like I mentioned earlier in the stream, I was pretty pessimistic at one point, saying we're not going to see sports again. I still have my worries about the NBA and MLS playing in Florida, who's had one of the highest spikes of coronavirus cases even in the United States, along with Arizona, I think Texas, California. I mean, right now, NBA, I think they said that they tested 137, and there's 0 positive results, which, that's cool, unless it's a false negative. But, yeah, Michael Hearn updated me. Wapkinez said they're not changing. Fort Loramie also mentioned that, too. I got that from State Line Sports Network, I believe. But, yeah, you can have your own opinion. This podcast isn't necessarily, you have to believe everything I say. If you don't agree with me, then blah, 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 blah. Trust me, I I don't have a big number in terms of listeners, which is okay. But at the same time, you can have your own opinion. If you think that it's a crock, that's fine. I mean, my personal opinion is, we're living in more enlightened times, and, if you learn that that's basically pretty much the N-word for Native Americans, then there you go. But, again, going back to, will we see high school football? I certainly hope so, because I miss broadcasting, I miss announcing, I miss sports, I miss working in sports. This year has been tough. Who thought that, I start off this year, oh hey, one of my hockey calls gets on ESPN's top 10 for January 6th. It was one of those Michigan goals where you're behind the goal line, you hit it off, and then bam. That was Harry Hall, and that was his second Michigan goal. But that was the first one, I believe, that got videotaped or streamed by yours truly. So that was really cool. And then everything else kind of fell apart in March. At least I get some college baseball in. I got 4 games, and I reached my 500th game as a public address announcer. So that was really cool, too. But, yeah. I'm not a doctor. I don't know what to tell you about the coronavirus. I wear a mask everywhere I go. I think everyone should. And here in Montgomery County, we are in level 3. There's 4 levels. The 4th level is doom and gloom, and you will probably have everything shut down again. I think there might be 1 or 2 counties that are close to level 4. Hamilton County, I think. Or was it Butler? Or was it Franklin County? They were close to level 4, but they're no longer. I mean, I worry about this thing. I worry about the unknown. I don't know what this can do, and especially since I have asthma, that coronavirus would probably destroy me. So, yeah, I worry about the coronavirus, and I wear a mask everywhere I go. I need to buy a Right State mask. But that's another topic here or there. Someone made a Right State mask with the old Rowdy Raider logo. Not the Rowdy Road Rodeo, but you get what I'm saying. And, yeah, I like that. So, yeah, that's neither here nor there. Let's get back. It looks like we might be heading to high school football, but if you look at other states, it doesn't look so sweet. California, I believe, said they're pushing the season back to December. And no, that won't work in Ohio. I mean, of course, December we'll probably have, temperatures reach the 70s again. And then January, February, here comes a mountain of snow falling down on the state because, of course, that happens during hockey season, which is arguably my most busy season of the 4. There's no off season for me. But, I love to see high school football back here. I'd love to be back broadcasting Loveland Tigers football with ESP Media because last year was a lot of fun. And I found out that my first Loveland home game, they shoot off fireworks. I remember my reaction. I think I jumped like a foot on top of the press box. And might not be funny to you. You might think I'm just a big jerk or something like that. But it's funny to me. But, yeah, I get to work in my dream city of Cincinnati broadcasting high school football. Yeah. And my last high school football game before that was a couple years back. So, definitely, I want to see high school football back. How can you social distance? Well, I'm more on the side of the press box. And really, you can't unless you have a ginormous press box, which some schools do, but a lot of them don't. You can't really have 6 feet apart. You got a scoreboard op. You got someone that runs the play clock, which might be the same person, but normally there's two different people. You got a statistician in there, you got the coaches, but normally they're in different rooms, sure. But, and don't forget the broadcasters, but luckily at Loveland we're on top of the roof, and I tell you, I love that view at Loveland. You feel like you're in the middle of the forest, but yet you're only about a mile or so away from one of the busiest stretches of retail and road in Cincinnati, Mason Montgomery. Actually, 22 and 3 are pretty busy too, but that's not the point. My point is, high school football, of course I want to see it back, but you gotta watch the players, and what if you have a school that decided, nope, we're not participating in fall sports, because that was the whole thing. You know, we'll let the schools decide. High school football in Ohio is big. It's one of the biggest states in the U.S. of A. of high school football. I mean, of course, you got California, Texas, Florida, like I mentioned, but Ohio, yeah, they can hold their own. There's some schools that have decided, hey, we're going to go online learning the first semester. Trotwood Madison being that school, and I think Middletown just decided on that too. Yeah, the Rams of Trotwood Madison and the Middies of Middletown, those are big schools. And I remember 10 years back, Middletown was undefeated in Division I, and they fell in the first playoff game at home to Wayne, and I was on the sideline for that. That's my first and only time as a sideline reporter. That was a lot of fun. That was a fun game. Wayne won that 21-0. They ended up falling to St. Edward or St. Edwards. One of the two. It was an Edward, and they fell by a 35-28 margin eventually. But, yeah, of course I want to see high school football back. I want to get back to work. But are the players going to be able to be safe and play in this? Remember, offensive, defensive lines. You think there's 6 feet of separation there? No. And do you think you can really have that? No, because then you have, you got all this defense coming in. It'll be pretty much like a giant blitz each and every time. Like I said, I definitely want high school football back, and I want to write about high school football on 12-ounce sports radio.com. But I worry about the athletes, the coaches. I worry about the people that work the games, the parents, and the superheroes, the people that are in the medical field. I mean, I can't imagine. And want to thank all the nurses, the doctors, and everything that have done their best job, because definitely they deserve a lot of credit. Will we see high school sports in the fall? I don't know. I hope so I can get back to work, but I don't know. I think that calls for another break here on the Cincinnati Dayton Sports Podcast. The 3-year celebration, we will wrap things up with a pretty cool topic. We'll talk about 3 years of this podcast, and thank all of you that have caught a podcast or two, and definitely talk about the 26 interviews I've had. Yes, I plan to do a lot more. In fact, I hope not to have another streak week where I have 8 episodes in 8 days. That was a lot, but again, I don't like sitting on interviews. I like releasing them as soon as I can. But I hope to have a week where I interview some folks that have, stations that cover local sports. But let's take a break, and I'll talk to you after here on the Cincinnati Dayton Sports Podcast, episode 172, and the 3-year celebration live stream on 12-ounce sports. Hey folks, do you like stickers? Sure you do. What about masks, mugs, notebooks, phone cases, throw pillows, backpacks, and even wall clocks? If you like any of those things, check out redbubble.com. You can search for the Cincinnati Dayton Sports Podcast, then click on either the main or alternative logo, or you can visit my press kit at theleewmowen.com/podcast and click on either podcasting logo from there. You can choose anything you might need from Redbubble's massive selection. Like I mentioned, there are tons of options and a very good showing of new phone cases you might need. Every purchase you make from these stores on Redbubble comes back and helps out yours truly. I myself have purchased a sticker or two from Redbubble, and they are very good quality. The more stickers you buy, the more of a discount you can get. So what are you waiting for? Shop the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast goods from Redbubble. Redbubble.
Esports are here to stay. Go to jazzsports.ag, log into your account, and look for our new esports section on the top of your screen. Browse through all the different available matches and watch them live with our exclusive esports betting platform. Get instant access to game results, pending and graded bet reports, outright bet types, and upcoming match schedules, all at the easy reach of your fingertips. Jazz Sports puts you in the game.
Hey folks, this is Lee W. Mowen of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast, and I'm here to talk to you about MyBookie. Since 2014, it's the place where you can bet on anything, anywhere, anytime. Get up to $1,000 on your first deposit bonus. Use the promo code 12OZSports. As well as sports betting, you can play some casino games, take in some live odds in Madden 20 and NBA 2K20, and even bet with Bitcoin. Visit mybookie.ag and use that promo code 12OZSports. That's 12OZSports. MyBookie, the industry's most rewarding loyalty program.
Drinkade, ready for distribution worldwide.
So now we head for third to round home on this live stream. And I'd like to talk about my podcast. Yes, I know I got 18 minutes left. It's an hour stream today. And yes, I can talk about my podcast a lot and myself, but I try not to, mainly because of the fact you don't come for me. Do you? Nah. You don't come for the podcaster himself, you come for the local sports. So I definitely want to talk about that. So like I mentioned, this is the 3-year celebration of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast. And yeah, year 4. I never would have thought I'd been doing this podcast that long, because I thought, I'll do the podcast for a little bit and then plop, it would just obscure into, podcast history. I keep seeing the stat, I think it's from Pod News, it says like out of all the podcasts available on Apple, like 25% are still active and making episodes. Now, of course, some podcasts are designed like that, but then there's others that are like, nah. Of course, this whole quarantine and no sports really hurts other sports podcasts, I know. I myself was really struggling, like, what am I going to do? What am I really going to do with this podcast? Because if I don't have live sports to talk about, what am I going to do? So luckily, it took me about 2 weeks, and I was like, you know what? Why don't I interview more people? And like I mentioned earlier, I have done 26 interviews since the quarantine. I've interviewed voices of teams such as Chris Collins for Wright State University, Larry Hansgen for University of Dayton, Steve Baker at Miami University, and Dan Horde. Yes, I mentioned Dan Horde, who's the voice of the Bengals and UC Bearcats. That interview, I was very surprised I got that, and you can't ask me which interview is my favorite. You just can't, because I love all of them, and it's about their stories on that episode. So definitely, if you want to go back and listen to these interviews, the best way to do that is the leewmowen.com/podcast. Then scroll down towards the bottom of the page, and I have links for all the guests. Actually, I got to double check that, make sure I do have all the links for that. But yeah, continuing on, I interviewed Chick Lugwit, who's currently a sports talk host in Cincinnati and formerly the beat writer for the Bengals at Dayton Daily News. You have Don Helbig, who's been a voice of Cincinnati hockey for quite some time, and also Don and I met with the Cincinnati Thunder when they played at South Metro Sports. He was the main broadcaster, I was the number 2 play-by-play guy, and yeah, that was a lot of fun. I learned a lot from him, and it was cool to have junior hockey and get my first taste on that because previously it's all been single A FHL. Also interviewed someone from California, Andero Trujillo, and he does his own thing out west. I do want to start having interviews with other podcasters. It's just, I don't know. I don't have a good excuse on this, but that is in the cards, as I'm sure this quarantine's not going to end for me anytime soon. We have a couple beat writers from Cincinnati Enquirer, Shelby Dermer, Adam Baum, Brandon Seho at WLWT NBC5 in Cincinnati, Jacob Wise, who broadcasts for the Chili Coffee Paints. He would have been one of my colleagues if we had a Prospect League season. Also, longtime sports anchor in Dayton, Mike Hartsock at WHIO, JD Zaba, who broadcasts a lot of Dayton hockey, now an assistant coach with Detroit Trojans. Good bunch of Trojans up there. They have Hobart Arena as their home, and they don't really have to share with anyone. By that, I mean any other high school, because Troy's kind of the last hockey high school team until you get up to Findlay. Also, David Jablonski, who's the current beat writer for the Dayton Flyers, and DDN also covers Wittenberg Tigers, the Cincinnati Reds. I know he's excited with the Reds returning, and also OSU. Jeremy Lance, he's a commissioner of Gotham Soccer. He also sideline reports for WMOH in Butler County and Hamilton, and also broadcasts a lot of soccer in Cincinnati and Dayton, especially with the Saints and Dynamo. Greg Waddell, who's broadcasting for the Miami Redhawks hockey team. Stuart Mason, he owns his own business at megasportsnews.com. I have the play-by-play voice of athletics at NKU, and Matt Sexton. He also coaches girls tennis at Blanchester. I have Chris Tilton, who's the first local Preble County native I got to interview. And that was a lot of fun just because that's where I'm from, West Alex. And he's from, actually I forget where he's from, but he's in Preble County. So I got to interview Kevin O'Boyle, who was my coworker at Dayton Dragons, and I released the episode the day before he passed away in his sleep. I'm still heartbroken about it. I had to miss his funeral. He was a good friend, and definitely a great interview with him. Got to interview one of my professors in college, Coach Jim Brown. He's the color commentator for Wright State basketball. In case you didn't get to hear that interview, one of the very first assistant coaches they hired at Wright State when, Wright State at the time was a branch campus of OSU and Miami. Ben Oburn, he's the PA announcer for the Dayton Dragons. Sally Taylor, she's a hockey mom and co-host of Living Dayton on WDTN. Also longtime news anchor, or news reporter, rather, for WHIO. I remember watching her a lot as a kid on TV. Dominic Gussler, I mentioned him a couple times. He's the PA announcer for Gem City Roller Derby. And I got to interview last Simon Reed, who owns New Star Games Limited. He helped create the game Retro Bowl, and it's still one of my favorite games that I have on my phone at the moment. So definitely a lot of fun, and man, that interview spread like wildfire. I think that's been one of my most listened to episodes. So definitely more to come. Like I mentioned, I want to interview some folks that are responsible for other stations in Southwest Ohio that bring local sports to the folks. There's the Butler County. I'm blanking at the wrong time. Butler County High School report. I have a feeling that's not right, but they do great work. Chatterbox Sports, ESP Media, of course. I got to broadcast football and little soccer with last season. Hopefully I'll be back this year. That's me knocking on wood if you can't hear it. But yeah, I got some loose plans in the mix. Will I be back to live stream? I don't know. I've been thinking about it. I mean, I do have this great platform with the 12-ounce sports family. My big thing is with live streams, I don't know. I feel like I sound like an idiot just because I feel like every word has to be typed in or else I sound like a complete buffoon. Whereas podcasts, with interviews, it's about the guest and also I do my best to get, more about them through. And of course, this podcast has always been about local Cincinnati Dayton sports, but that wouldn't change if I start to live stream. I don't know. I mean, I like to, but my schedule, especially when we get sports back, it's, how do we say in the trade? Very fluid, because 1 week I can work like 5 games, the other week I have like 1. But I don't know. I mean, I like to talk about it at least, so maybe that'll be in the cards. I don't know. 3 years of this podcast. It's been known as the Gem on the Queen's Crown, then the Gem on the Queen's Crown Cincinnati Dayton Sports Podcast, and the Cincinnati Dayton Sports Podcast. It's had a couple logos, as you can see right there on the stream. If you're listening to the podcast, then you can't because it's audio only, but I think you figured that out by yourself. You didn't need me to tell you that. I mean, that's the main logo. I made that myself, and I was quite happy with that, especially since the gear and the waves in the sky are from the old logo that Chad Hollingsworth made me, which he used to write on his own platform, Scratching the Pitch, which covered soccer in Southwest Ohio. High school, pro, semi-pro, collegiate, Chad had it. And the alternate logo, which it's not high in quality, you can tell by the pixels and everything. I always liked the logo that's based on, and I wanted a second logo. You can get the second logo stuff at Redbubble, and you can get the main logo stuff at Redbubble and TeePublic. Again, TeePublic, as I'll mention, and play it one more time before we sign off. There's a sale today and tomorrow, 35% off, up to 35% off, and short sleeve t-shirts are $13. Good quality stuff. I still have my 2 old logo ones. I really need a new logo. Anything, really. But, that's neither here nor there. So, I got about 8 minutes before we have to sign off and call it a day. It's been a lot of fun. And thank you, whoever's out there watching live or coming back for the podcast replay at episode 172. I mean, you listening to this podcast means a lot to me. And, just your listenership, your friendship, you sending in questions from Alan's mailbag, it does mean a lot to this podcaster. I started this podcast back in 2017, kind of as a way to say, hey, local Dayton radio stations, you could hire me and I could sound pretty good on air. I mean, it hasn't happened yet, but, there's that hope. But I want to talk a little bit about local sports before we sign off. I mentioned the Reds. They have one more exhibition before the regular season begins on Friday for Cincinnati. Yesterday was the first game that wasn't Reds versus Reds, and the Cincinnati Reds came out on top 9-7 against the Detroit Tigers. In that game, I believe there was 9 home runs and 5 came from the Reds. Shogo Akiyama heard some cheers loud and clear from his teammates in the Reds dugout. Of course, there's no fans. And my opinion, in case you want to hear it on artificial noise, no, don't do it. It doesn't sound right. Just have it empty. The players know that there's not going to be fans for quite some time because of the fact that, hey, guess what? We're still dealing with this coronavirus, and we don't really have a solution for it quite yet. Although there is some hope about some vaccines, but, I'm not a doctor, and this is not a doctor's podcast. This is a sports podcast. I think you knew that. So, yeah, like I mentioned, I think the Reds will have a good year. I think the offense, if they don't slump, I think they'll be fine. Starting pitching, I'm not worried about. I like the starting 5 out there, including the addition of Wade Miley. The bullpen is the only thing that puts a little fear in my boots. Actually, I wear sandals most of the time, but you get what I'm saying. I really think that this could be a great year for the Reds. Shortened season, yes, but I do think the Reds will do some work. And now to talk about MLS. Yes, that's right. We cover all the sports. And this podcast covers not only FC Cincinnati, because, they're in Cincinnati, but the Columbus Crew. And the reason why is because I'm the most evil person out there. No, I'm not. We talk about the Crew just because at the time Cincinnati didn't have MLS team. They had the USL team in FC Cincinnati. And, I'm not going to stop talking about the Crew because I like the Crew. And it's nice that both Ohio MLS teams are getting new new stadiums. I was going to say new arenas, but that'd be nice too. But new stadiums for 2021. FC Cincinnati, of course, getting the West End, and the Crew moving to the Arena District, along with the AAA Columbus Clippers, the Blue Jackets, of course, and I feel like I'm missing a team. Hopefully, the third rendition of the Columbus Destroyers when, the IFL returns to action. But we'll see how that goes. So right now, it's the MLS is Back tournament. And most of the groups have been decided except Group E, which Columbus won that. They're undefeated, and I don't believe they allowed a goal, which that's pretty good. I think Caleb Porter will do just fine in his second year as the manager of the Crew. FC Cincinnati, well, hell was certainly real that first game, giving up 4 goals to Columbus. But if you look at the Crew and what they did in the next 2 matches, yeah, I think that's a pretty good Crew team. Whereas for FC Cincinnati, they did rebound and they picked up a 1-0 win against Atlanta United FC. Granted, yes, Atlanta had 10 men on the field. Getting a red card will do that, combined or straight red. But hey, a win is a win is a win. And this sets up a very interesting match tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. Cincinnati, or FC Cincinnati, will take on the New York Red Bulls, formerly the Metro Stars, way back in the day. A win, FC Cincinnati's in, and they'll move on to the round of 16. A tie, well, FC Cincinnati, they should be in, but there is a couple of situations that would give the nod to New York. A loss, that pretty much puts New York in. Because right now, New York and Cincinnati have the same record in Group E. The other teams that have clinched a spot in the round of 16, you have Orlando and Philadelphia in Group A. Group B's got San Jose and Seattle. Group C, Toronto FC and New England. Group D, Sporting Kansas City and Real Salt Lake. It also looks like Minnesota might have clinched as well. Keep in mind, FC Dallas and Nashville withdrew from the tournament. I thought Houston did too, but looks like they're not advancing out of Group F. Again, Group D advancing is Sporting Kansas City, Real Salt Lake, and Minnesota. Group E, Columbus right now, and that second spot is up for grabs. Again, FC Cincinnati with a win or a draw are more likely advancing. A win will definitely put them in. Group F, Portland, the former home of Caleb Porter, and Los Angeles Football Club. And that's your look at the knockout stages. Last day of the knockout stages will be tomorrow, and your final will be August 11th at 8. It'll be on ESPN and TSN, which I always thought was like Toronto Sports Network. I think it's just the Sports Network. It's like ESPN Canada, if you will. Semifinals begin August 5th, and quarterfinals begin July 30th. Round of 16 will begin a little bit later. July 25th, Orlando City will have the 3 CDE of that group. Some of the matches already determined. Philadelphia, New England, and that's it. And that will do it. That is 1 hour in the books. Wow. Originally, I wanted this 2 hours, but then I thought, probably not, just because I'm just going to, say how great I am for the second hour. But yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I want to again thank Jeff Beck and the 12 Ounce Sports family for not only bringing me into the fold, but allowing me to live stream today and write and send in questions for Mowen's mailbag.
It's time for Mowen's mailbag.
Okay, sorry, I had to do that one more time. I want to thank you, the listener. Throughout these 3 years, if I didn't have any listeners, I don't know, if it all was for naught. But, yeah, I appreciate all of you, and I don't know what the future holds for this podcast. I mean, I'll still continue on, but live streaming, I don't know quite yet. I mean, it'd be nice to continue on that, but again, I got a busy schedule. Well, I did pre-coronavirus, but there you go. Keep on watching 12-Ounce Sports. Follow along on social media. If you want to follow me, I'm at the Lee W. Mallon pretty much everywhere, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And you can follow the podcast, same platforms, Cinday Pod, CINDAYPOD. TheLeeWMallon.com is my website. Go there for interesting stuff. And the LeeWMallon.com/podcast, the press kit. You can buy stuff there. Again, TeePublic's got a sale until tomorrow. And that'll wrap up the live stream here on 12-Ounce Sports. This is Lee W. Mallon signing off. Thank you for joining me today. We'll talk to you again for episode 173.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast with Lee W. Mallon. To subscribe to this podcast, please visit theleewmallon.com, spelled TheLeewMowen.com, then click on Podcast. From there, you can find your favorite way to catch new episodes of this podcast, such as on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, TuneIn, the iHeartRadio app, Pandora, and many more platforms. Follow along on social media by liking the Facebook page, the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast, and follow along on Twitter at CindayPod and the Lee W. Mallon. Feel free to send in future questions for Mallon's Mailbag on Twitter or Facebook. The closing theme was created with the Splash app, available for free on Google Play and the App Store. This is Lee W. Mallon signing off. Let's talk local Cincinnati and Dayton sports again on the next